Amen. Got a live one here. He's ready to eat. Stay quiet. I'll plug you right here. This is Landon Paul Haig. Oh, here he goes. Oh. There goes my record. Take it. She's got you. This is Jonathan and Monica Haig's new little boy. How cool is this? Watch that microphone. Bad news. Look at this. I'll hold you up like Simba. Yeah, you don't like that, do you? Sorry. This is pretty cool. Jonathan and Monica were both two of my kids in youth ministry. So to sit here and hold their new little boy is a pretty cool thing. And Lord, we pray for this little boy right here, for Landon, that you would just hold him. Yeah. And Lord, that he can learn about you in a mighty way. I'm letting you cry, baby. And I pray for Jonathan and Monica that you would just encourage them, that you would teach them, that you would give them wisdom, that you give them peace, that you give them rest as they raise this young boy to know you. And it's in Jesus' holy name I pray. Amen. Here you go, Mama. That's a beautiful sound, isn't it? When it's not yours. I'm going to fly today, so you guys stay with me. I sent you an email last night or yesterday and asked you to read Genesis 37, which is the story about Joseph. Joseph as a little boy. And I went over this with the students. So just to kind of quickly catch you up, is Jacob is the father, and we've gone over this the last couple of weeks. He's the father of these 12 boys with several different mothers, 2 being his wives and 2 being the slave servants of the wives. And he's got 12 kids. And Joseph being one of the youngest, not the youngest, but one of the youngest, but one of the first from Rachel, his loved wife. And he had 11 older brothers, and they were doing the shepherding, and Joseph was favored by his father so much that his father made this prized robe for him that was really expensive, because having color back then, the dye in the material back then was very expensive. So they gave him this multicolored robe, and he stood out among everybody else. And the older brothers got jealous. And here's the sticking part of the whole thing in chapter 37. It's like the second verse, maybe the first verse. But it says, Jacob sent Joseph out to get a report about how well his brothers were doing. And Joseph came back and gave a bad report. You get the picture, right? It's got 11 brothers that are already upset with Joseph because he's the favorite. And now Joseph is going back and telling Daddy on them that they're doing a bad job. So there's just this anger that's like developed among them, and so much that when he goes out to do a report the next time, is that they see him coming, they decide to throw him in a pit and go back and tell their dad that he has died. Reuben tries to save him, but before that can be done, the other brothers have dug him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites. Now you're sitting here going, Ishmaelites, that sounds familiar. Remember, you had Isaac and Ishmael, the division after Abraham, remember that? So the Ishmaelites were on the opposite side of Isaac's kids, and he sold Joseph off to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites took Joseph then to Egypt, and they sold him to Potiphar, who was an officer of Pharaoh. And yet the whole time the brothers go back, they've taken a bloody lamb and they've messed up his Technicolor dream coat and taken it back to Dad and said, he's dead. A wild animal got him. And it just destroyed Jacob. Destroyed Jacob. That's chapter 37. Skip 38 and go to chapter 39. That's where we're going to pick up today as we fly through the end of Genesis and we get through the whole story of Joseph today. I'm not reading all this to you, so we'll skip through. But Genesis 39, verse 1, it says, Now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. It didn't matter how good Joseph was, it was that the Lord was with him that made him successful. Serving in the household of his Egyptian master, when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor in the master's sight and he became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. I have to tell you something kind of privately. I just saw the manager of Pinheads walk in before I came up here. This is the dude that booted us out of this place. The first year that we were here, he came in, he was a new manager. And then I sent him an email and said, hey, here's 10 reasons why we need to be in Pinheads. And the next week he let us back in. We got kicked out for a week. Remember that? That was back in 2008. And he says, I've talked to the owners and we want you back in here. And we're not going to charge you a dime. And we've been in here ever since. I say this kind of quietly because I know he's around. But I don't know how much he knows of this, if you get what I'm saying. And I really think that he thinks that we're good karma for his business. I think he sees that we're blessed. And it's encouraging for us to be here. He wants us to be here. And that's really kind of the same thing that's happening right here. They see that Joseph is blessed. It doesn't have anything to do with me, doesn't have anything to, it's just that God's doing it. God's doing this great work among the people, and it's noticeable. It says the Lord's blessing was on all that he owned in his house and in his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. That's a typical guy. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. That's kind of descriptive there. He was well built and handsome. Another reason some of the brothers may be jealous of him. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused. His master, being Pharaoh's wife, wanted to sleep with Joseph, and he refused repeatedly. In verse 10 it says, although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. Now one day he went to the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were there. That's red flag number one. She grabbed him by his garment and said, "Sleep with me," but leaving his garment in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. What is that picture? That's the picture that you've always heard about as a little kid. She grabbed him by the garment, he left his garment, he left naked. She's wanting to sleep with him, this handsome, nice looking, well-built dude, and he left naked. It said, I got the kids listening now. When she saw that he had left his garment with her and run outside, she called the household servants. "Look," she said to them, "my husband brought a Hebrew man to make fools of us. He came to me so he could sleep with me, and I screamed as loud as I could, when he heard me screaming for help, he left his garment with me and ran outside. She's absolutely lying. This is not what happened at all. She put Joseph's garment beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story. The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool of me. But when I screamed for help, he left his garment with me and ran outside. When Pharaoh, his master, Joseph's master, heard this story, his wife told him, "These are the things your slave did to me." He was furious. He had thrown him into prison where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph was there in prison. Verse 21, it says, "But the Lord was with Joseph." The Lord never left Joseph. The whole time, God is with Joseph and extended kindness to him while he's in jail. He granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. I'm sure it was a working class prison, is that he was in charge and he was delegated and he did all the delegating. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. Now let's go to chapter 40, and just let me describe to you what happened in chapter 40 rather than read the whole thing. While he is in prison, Pharaoh also jailed his cupbearer, which is like, remember we've talked about the cupbearer being an important thing before, because the cupbearer is the one that always drinks the wine or juice or whatever before the king does to make sure that it's not poisoned. And that cupbearer is like really, really close to the Pharaoh. So he puts the cupbearer and his chief baker into prison as well for something that they've done. And these two begin to like have dreams. They both have dreams, and they can't figure out what the dreams mean. And Joseph says, "Well, I can't tell you I can't interpret your dreams for you, but my God can. So tell me your dreams, and I'll tell you what they mean." And they tell him their dreams, and he says to the cupbearer, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your rightful position." And the chief baker's thinking, "Oh, this is a good outcome. I'm going to tell him my dream." Tells him his dream, and he says, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will hang the chief baker." So one gets restored, and one's going to be hung. And in 3 days, it happened exactly as Joseph interpreted. And the last verse of chapter 40, it says, "Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him." Like he went back to his rightful position and just totally forgot what happened in prison. So then we go to chapter 41. And in chapter 41, it says, this is 2 years later after all this dreaming. So he's been in prison for who knows how long. He had time to take over the authority and reign of the prison, plus the 2 years here. Who knows how long he was in prison. And it says, the cupbearer remembered Joseph, and Pharaoh called for him. The reason the cupbearer remembered Joseph is because the Pharaoh had 2 distinct dreams, and no one could interpret them for him. Like he's literally like gone around to his whole court and said, "I've got these 2 dreams. Somebody tell me what these dreams are about." And all of a sudden the cupbearer goes, "You know, the reason I got out of prison was because somebody interpreted. That was Joseph." So Pharaoh told Joseph to interpret his dream, and Joseph told him his dream. In verse 25 it says, "Then Joseph said to Pharaoh," Pharaoh's dream means the same thing. Both dreams mean the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 ripe heads are 7 years. These are the 2 dreams that Pharaoh had. It says the dreams mean the same thing. The 7 thin, ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 worthless, scorched heads of grain are 7 years of famine. It is just as I told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance in the land of Egypt, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. After them, 7 years of famine will take place, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. The famine will devastate the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because of the famine that follows it, for the famine will be very severe. Since the dream was given twice to Pharaoh, it means that the matter has been determined by God and he will carry it out soon. This is Joseph, who just got out of prison, standing before the Pharaoh, saying this is exactly what's going to happen. Joseph then goes on to detailed plan. He said, Pharaoh, this is what you need to do. You need to store up for 7 years. There's going to be so much in this bounty of grain that you're going to have the ability to survive the famine, and you need to put people in charge. And he gives a detailed plan to the Pharaoh about what needs to happen. And it says in verse 39, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as intelligent and wise as you are. You will be over my house, and all my people will obey your commands. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you. So Joseph got dumped by his 11 brothers in a hole, picked up by the Ishmaelites, sold to Pharaoh, became a servant to Pharaoh, got thrown into prison by Pharaoh because his wife lied, came in charge of the prison. Now he's second in command to the Pharaoh. Why? Because God was with him. It wasn't anything that Joseph did. God gave Joseph that plan of how to deal with the famine. And Pharaoh trusted, get this, he trusted Joseph's God. He says, Pharaoh also said to Joseph, see, I'm placing you over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh removed his signet ring. He took his signet ring that he stamps everything with from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him with fine linen garments, and placed a gold chain around his neck. He's got everything that he needs, which is just amazing. We jump to verse 46. It says, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He was a teenager when he was thrown into the pit. So 13, 15 years have gone by. Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. He was checking everything out. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced outstanding harvests. Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in the cities. He literally distributed all that was grown and produced and distributed it throughout. He put the food in every city from the fields around it. And then pay attention to verse 49. It says, so Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. That is just so God right there. Is that he knows what's coming. He knows there's 7 years of produce, but yet he knows about 7 years of famine. I think most of you in this room, what would you focus on? The 7 years of famine. You'd be freaking out. Oh, there's going to be 7 years of famine. But what God has done here is he's provided so much grain, it's like that 7 years of famine is going to be covered. God has produced so much that they just even quit measuring it. Verse 50, it says, 2 sons were born to Joseph. This is important. Before the years of the famine arrived. Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest at On, bore them to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, meaning, God has made me forget all my hardship in my father's house. You think you really forgot? Why would you name your son that? And the second son he named Ephraim, meaning, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every country, but throughout the land of Egypt there was food. To wrap up chapter 41, basically all nations came to Joseph during the famine to buy food. They came to Joseph. all nations around Egypt that were having, that's Israel included, that's Canaan, the land of plenty, came to Joseph because of the famine. And then verse 42. Jacob, who is now renamed Israel, sent his 10 sons, all his sons, obviously he thinks Joseph is dead, but one, the very youngest, Benjamin. He sent his 10 sons to Egypt to buy grain. They too were part of the famine, and they needed to eat, and they had to go to Joseph. Or you see this story, most of you know this story. So here's the 10 sons all going to Egypt to get their load that they can buy. Jacob sends them with plenty of money to buy enough grain that they need. And Joseph sees them coming in the distance. What do you think's going through his head? Those are my brothers. Those are my brothers that threw me in the pit. Those are my brothers that sold me off. Those are the brothers that when I was a kid, I had this dream that they would one day bow before me. And I told them, and it made them even madder. Those are my brothers coming over the hill. So they get there, and they stand before Joseph, and Joseph, what's he doing? He's sitting there eyeballing every one of them just closely. Oh my goodness, look how they changed. Oh, he ate a lot. But he's just doing all that. You know what I'm saying? He's like looking at them all, and he's like, there's one missing. I've got one, this is only 10. He's counting. And the thing is, the brothers don't recognize him. He's probably got on like all this garb and everything else. And he's actually speaking a different language than Hebrew. And he has an interpreter beside him. So everything that he says, even though he can speak Hebrew, he goes through his interpreter. Joseph accused them of being spies, and he spoke harshly to them. That's the word the Bible uses, that he spoke harshly to them. I can't imagine what's going through his head. Surely he knew this day was coming. So then he just scares them and he says, I want them to go to prison because they're spies. And in 3 days, he figures out what he's going to do with them. And he says in verse 18, on the third day, Joseph said to them, I fear God. Do this and you will live. Now he's putting the fear of God in his brothers. Remember what you did to me? This is just a little recourse. If you are honest, let one of you be confined to the guardhouse while the rest of you go and take grain to relieve the hunger of your household. He's still thinking about his dad. He's got to take care of his dad, mom. He's like, bring your youngest brother to me so that your words can be confirmed. Obviously, he's had a conversation in this chapter 42 where he's like, is this all of y'all? Nope, our dad's home with his youngest son, Benjamin. They told Joseph that their youngest brother was at home, but one of their other brothers is no longer with them. Verse 21, it says, then they said to each other, obviously we're being punished for what we did to our brother. We saw his deep distress. You know, like if you think Joseph doesn't speak your language, you just go out here and talk. You know what I'm talking about? You just talk freely, and that's what the brothers are doing. They're talking freely. He says, obviously we're being punished for what we did to our brother. They don't know it's their brother, but they feel it's just the karma that's coming about, that God is like now cursing them. We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us, but he would not listen. That is why this trouble has come to us, because of what we did to our brother years ago. But Reuben, the oldest, replied, didn't I tell you not to harm the boy? I told you guys. But you wouldn't listen. Now we must account for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph understood them, and since there was an interpreter between them. He turned away from them and he wept. Like emotion just overcome Joseph, because these are my brothers. And now there's a sign of repentance of what they did to me. he literally had to turn his back to his brothers so they wouldn't see him crying. It says, then he turned back and he spoke to them. He took Simeon from them and had him bound before their eyes. He's still being harsh. I'm sure he took Simeon kind of roughly. Joseph then gave orders to fill their containers with grain, return each man's money to his sack. And he didn't tell them that. He told his servants that. Return their money to his sack and give them provisions for their journey. This order was carried out. They loaded the grain on their donkeys and they left there. Let me explain what happened at the end of chapter 42. As they returned home to Canaan and to their father Jacob, they realized that all their money had been returned. They started opening these sacks of grain, and all the money that they had taken there to pay for the grain was in their bags. Like Joseph had told his servants, take everything that they were going to pay for the grain and just give it back to them. If you didn't know that was your brother, you'd be like going, what is going on? Are we going to get nailed for this? Are we going to get nailed for, like, are they going to say that we stole from them? It's the whole power of sin thing, you know, that works on us right here. It's working on those brothers right there. They're like going, I don't get this. And they sit there and they told the whole story to Jacob, their dad. He's like, where's Simeon? Why is there only 9 of you? Well, Pharaoh's second man kept him because he wants us to bring Benjamin back. And Jacob's like, that ain't happening. I've already lost Joseph. Now I've lost Simeon. If I take my second favorite, Benjamin, Rachel's other son, and send him, I might not ever see him again. It ain't happening, guys. And so they blow through that grain over a season of time. And it gets to the point where, hey, we need more grain. You know what? We have to go back to Egypt and get more grain from Pharaoh's court. They start pleading, Dad, let us take Benjamin. Judah says, Dad, I promise you. Reuben says, I'll put my 2 sons here. I'll put my 2 sons here on the line. I promise you I'll bring Benjamin back. Judah's like, come on, Dad. We've got to take Benjamin so that we can get enough grain, because they're not going to give us grain if we don't bring Benjamin. And they stayed until they ran out of grain. In chapter 43 it says, now the famine in the land was severe. When they had used up the grain they had brought back from Egypt, their father said to them, go back and buy us some food. They're negotiating everything that they can with Jacob. Verse 11 it says, then the father Israel said to them, this is Jacob, if it must be so, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your packs and take them down to the man as a gift. The man. That's Joseph. They don't know who the man is. Take them to the man as a gift. Some balsam and some honey, some aromatic gum and some resin and some pistachios and almonds. Take twice as much money with you. Return the money that was returned to you in the top of your bags. Perhaps it was a mistake. Even Jacob's got some power of sin working on him. Take your brother also and go back at once to the man. May God Almighty cause the man to be merciful to you so that he will release your other brother and Benjamin to you. I'm trusting God that if I give them Benjamin, that he's going to send them back along with everybody else. He says, as for me, if I'm deprived of my sons, then I'm deprived. He's like, I'm trusting God for this. So they pack up with all the money and the gifts. They go to Egypt. And guess what? They get in front of Joseph and he sees Benjamin. And he goes to his servants and he orders them, take these men to my house and feed them a meal. So his servants take all his brothers, now 11 brothers, including Simeon, to his house. And they are freaking out. Oh, why did we go to his house? What is going to happen now? And all of a sudden, they see their servants preparing a meal for them. power of sin is just like working in these brothers' heads, and they're coming up with all these different like theories of what's going on. They have no idea that it's Joseph, their brother. So Joseph comes before them, and the first thing he does is he inquires about their father. What's the word on your father? He's well, but he wants his sons to come home. And then he looks at Benjamin and he looks at the rest of them and he goes, is this your father's youngest? Did he not already know? He can't let on to his brothers that he knows that it's Benjamin. He goes, is this your father's youngest? Knowing very well that it was, the brothers confirmed that it was. And at that point, not only did he turn, but he had to leave the room because he was so emotional. Confirmed that it was Benjamin, his younger brother. He literally had to leave the room because he was weeping. And then he gathers himself, fixes his face back up, and goes back out to his brothers. And it says they served a meal. They served it first to Joseph by himself. Then they served it to his brothers by themselves. Then they served it to the Egyptian servants by themselves, because Hebrews and Egyptians were not allowed to eat together. And the last verse says they got drunk together with Joseph. They became intoxicated. Chapter 44, it says, then Joseph commanded his steward, fill the men's bags with as much food as they can carry, and put them, each one's money, at the top of the bag. Put my cup, the silver one, at the top of the youngest one's bag along with the grain money. So he did as Joseph told him. They got all their food, they got all their grain, they got all their money back, and yet the silver cup was put in Benjamin's bag. Joseph then orders his men to follow him. They hadn't got that far away, to pursue him, to find his cup. Find my cup. My cup is gone. So they cut the brothers off the path, and he said, hey, his cup's gone. Our ruler's cup is gone. Now we have to find it. They go, we didn't take it. All we took was the grain. All we took was the grain. So then they start dumping the packs, and they go through them. They go, there's money on top, there's money on top, there's money on top. Oh, look at Benjamin's. There's a cup. And immediately they're brought back to the presence of Joseph. Joseph says, I'm keeping the one who had the cup. What? All the brothers start freaking out. Not this one. This is Dad's favorite. Benjamin has to go back. If you're going to take anybody, take one of us, but don't keep Benjamin. Don't keep Benjamin. This will crush our dad. And Joseph's sitting there going, it's my dad too. Judah pleaded and pleaded and pleaded with Joseph. Then chapter 45 it says, Joseph could no longer keep his composure. He literally begins weeping. He could no longer keep his composure in front of all of his attendants, so he called out, send everyone away from me. No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. They're all alone. 11 dudes and Joseph. Probably takes off his headdress, wipes his eyes, says, do you know who I am? In his own voice. They recognize his voice. They're going, oh my, it's Joseph. That's Joseph. That's Joseph. No, it's not. It is. He reveals his identity to his brothers. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and also Pharaoh's household heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? Is Jacob still alive? But they could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. What is he going to do to us now? He's like, he's risen from the dead. He's got all this power. And they're probably like going, you know that dream? Remember that dream that he had? We've already bowed down to him once. That dream came true. It says, then Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. And they came near. I am Joseph, your brother, he said, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, don't be worried or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. He's like, hey guys, I went through some pretty tough times, but it was all part of God's plan. Chill out. Relax. They had the power of sin work with them. He's playing us. He's playing us. He can't really forgive us. It says, for the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant with the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all the land of Egypt. Do you hear what Joseph just said? He said, look, you guys are so important that God put this whole plan together. He took me out of it. He's put me in charge so that later you guys can be dominant and you can have many descendants in many nations. This is all part of the plan. He's like, return quickly to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. That would have been awesome. To be one of the brothers and to go back to Jacob and say, hey, guess what, Dad? Guess who's in charge of all the grain? Your son Joseph. He's alive. Can you imagine the face of Jacob? He says, God has made me the Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. He tells this to Jacob. You can settle in the land of Goshen and be near me. You, your children and grandchildren, your sheep, your cattle, and all you have. Go tell them to come live with me. I'll take care of them. I'll take care of the whole family. There I will sustain you, for there will be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you and your household and everything you have will become destitute. Look, your eyes and my brother's Benjamin's eyes can see that it is I, Joseph, who am speaking to you. Tell my father all about my glory in Egypt and all you have seen, and bring my father here quickly. The brothers returned to Jacob and they told him, Joseph's alive and he wants us to come live. He's got plenty of food. He wants us to come live with him. He's like, Jacob's just like, what? Jacob says, I'm going to see him if it's the last thing that I do. I want to see my son Joseph. Chapter 46 says, Israel set out with all that he had and came to Beersheba, and he offered sacrifice to the God of his father Isaac. That night God spoke to Israel in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he said. And Jacob replied, here I am. And God said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you back. Joseph will put his hands on your eyes. See, Jacob wasn't convinced to go until God appeared to him. Then once God speaks to him very clearly, he's like, this thing's on. It says, Jacob left Beersheba. The sons of Israel took their father and Jacob in the wagon that Pharaoh had sent to carry him along with their children and their wives. They also took their cattle and possessions, and they acquired in the land of everything they owned, they took with them to Egypt. Can you imagine what that caravan looked like? Then Jacob and all of his children went with him to Egypt, his sons and grandsons, his daughters and granddaughters, indeed all of his offspring, and he brought them with Egypt. That chapter goes on to list everybody. In the last verse it says, and all those of Jacob's household who came to Egypt were 70 people. 70 people in Jacob's family came to Egypt to live with Joseph. It says, now Jacob had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to prepare for his arrival at Goshen. When they came to the land of Goshen, Joseph hitched the horses to his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. Joseph presented himself to him, threw his arms around him, and wept for a long time. It's the reunion of Jacob and Joseph. Then Jacob, Israel, says to Joseph, at last I can die now that I've seen your face and know that you are still alive. We jump to chapter 47. It says, Joseph then brought his father Jacob and presented him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Are you getting this? Like Pharaoh, he's the ruler. He's like got all the land there in Egypt. And Jacob, the Hebrew, comes and he puts a blessing on Pharaoh. He says, then Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many years have you lived? Jacob said to Pharaoh, my pilgrimage has lasted 130 years. I'm 130 years. Do you know what it was like to pack up 70 people and move down here at 130? My years have been few and hard, and they have not surpassed the years of my fathers during the pilgrimages. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and departed from Pharaoh's presence. The great famine occurred, and get this, the great famine occurred until all the money, all the livestock, all the land was sold to Pharaoh for grain. Like literally, all the nations around Pharaoh sold everything that they had so they could survive the famine. Now, who's the ultimate ruler? Pharaoh. Now, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years, and his lifespan was 147 years. That's old. When the time drew near for him to die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise me that you will deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt. It's kind of a weird thing to do, put your hand under her thigh, but it's the way they did it. When I rest with my fathers, carry me away from Egypt and bury me in the burial place. Joseph answered, I will do what you have asked. And Jacob said, swear to me. So Joseph swore to him, then Israel bowed in thanks at the head of his bed. Chapter 48 says, sometime after this, Joseph was told, your father is weaker. So he set out with his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, your son Joseph has come to you, Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. So to get this picture, Jacob's dying. He's got his son Joseph there, and Joseph's got his two boys there, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Joseph asked Jacob, his father, to bless his two sons. And Jacob blessed both of Joseph's sons. Like, literally, he was supposed to bless just Manasseh. But Jacob says, I'm going to bless Ephraim too. And Joseph says, no, you just got to bless Manasseh. He's my oldest. No. I'm blessing both. Because they're both going to become great nations. Chapter 49, it says, then Jacob called his sons and said, gather around and I will tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Come together and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel. And Jacob, he goes through all of his sons, and he says, this is specifically what's going to happen to you. I'm not reading that to you right here, but that's what he does. In verse 28, he says, these are the tribes of Israel. All of you are going to become a tribe, including Manasseh and Ephraim. 12 in all. And this was what the Father said to them. He blessed them, and he blessed each one with a suitable blessing. When Jacob had finished instructing his sons, he drew his feet into the bed and died. He was gathered to his people. And then the last chapter, it wraps up Joseph's whole life right here. It says, then Joseph, leaning over his father's face, wept and kissed him. Can you imagine that story? He commanded his servants who were physicians to embalm his father, so they embalmed Israel. They took 40 days to complete this. For embalming takes that long, and the Egyptians mourned for him for 70 days. Verse 15, it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, if Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the suffering we caused him. Like now that Dad's gone, is Joseph going to pay us back? They're still got the power of sin struggling with them. After 17 years, they've been waiting. Is Joseph really going to retaliate? So they sent his message to Joseph. Before he died, your father gave a command. I love this. Say to this Joseph, please forgive your brother's transgressions and their sin, the suffering they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God your father. Joseph wept with their message. and when they came to him. Then his brothers also came to him and bowed down before him and said, "We are your slaves." Joseph, whatever you need, we'll do it. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. I am in the place of God. You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. Therefore, don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. This is family that did him wrong. You get that? This is family that did him wrong. And he spoke kindly to them. He comforted them. Verse 22, Joseph and his father's household remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years. He saw Ephraim's son to the third generation. The sons of Manasseh's son Machir were recognized by Joseph. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land, the land he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So Joseph made the sons of Israel take an oath. "When God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones up from here." Joseph died at the age of 110. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. Both Jacob and Joseph were eventually taken back to Canaan. And that, my friends, is the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph in Genesis. Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for just the stories about how you take care, even today in times of famine, whatever it may be, not even food, but just issues. That one, I absolutely know and I affirm that you are with us. You have blessed us over and over and over. And I look, just as Keith mentioned in the prayer time, around this room and know that there's a variety of issues and family going on in this room, that you will just provide and take care and continue to bless as you already have. Lord, thank you for your word, and I pray these things in Jesus' name.